Full J YouTube site when it's done. So thanks for joining. I appreciate it. For those of you who don't know me, I know a lot of the folks on the meeting, but there's some new names, some new faces. My name is Chuck McLean. I'm the Chief Judge here at the Commission. I've been with the Commission for over 14 years in different positions. Been the Chief Judge for the last 5 or so. I've got a sarcastic sense of humor, so that's just kind of how I get through my day. So please, I'll apologize for that in advance. I tend to use sir and ma'am a lot, but that's just me. I'm not trying to be overly formal. Just again, that's just me. In terms of the work group, I know that there were some issues with the first one. I would envision this going much differently. Now, given we've got a pretty condensed schedule, we can talk about more about how often we're going to meet once we get the agenda set. In terms of the goal, ultimate goal, obviously, would be a consensus on all items, but I also know that that's likely not going to happen, and I'm absolutely fine with that. What I want to avoid is getting into positions where parties are just so intractable that there's no movement whatsoever, and that prevents us from moving forward. I know the Commission said if we have issues such like that, to go to them and they'll kind of break the tie. But I'd like to avoid that if at all possible, just because it's going to waste time, which we don't have. So I'm fine with non-consensus issues, and as long as we can give the Commission some solid options to choose from, I'll be happy with that. So with that in mind, if everyone could just keep an open mind and be willing to give a bit on your positions. In terms of the reports, I've got 2 reports to do, one in January and one in April, I believe. I can tell you that everyone will have an opportunity to review and edit and propose edits of whatever I file with the Commission. So that it won't be the first time you see the report, won't be when it's filed. And I'm open to taking all kinds of suggestions. The only thing I don't want to see in the report is something brand new. So if you're raising something that hasn't been raised before in any of our meetings or in written comments, if we do that, that's something I would not want to see in a report and won't be included. Again, frequency of meetings. If we could, I'd love to meet every other week. And I know I suggested maybe meeting every week, but I just don't know what the agenda is going to look like, whatever everyone's input is on it. But, if we could meet every other week, that'd be my preference, especially since we've got a technical conference kind of in the middle of things. And I don't want to spend a ton of time meeting every week and then only have to go back and revisit everything, all the ground we've covered once this technical conference happens in November or December.
Judge McLean, I think we're getting some messages that people are trying to get into the meeting.
Yep. I'm admitting everybody as they come in.
Okay, great.
All right. And with that, that's pretty much all the introductory stuff I have. Things I'd like to accomplish today is obviously if we could nail down an agenda. And again, I realize we'll have to be flexible depending on how far we get with things. I know that there was a sub work group from the first phase that met, and I'm hoping to get a report from them. And then hopefully the utilities can address how the current DSP practices are promoting the policy goals set forth in 7802. And hopefully that'll just be short, kind of a brief overview. First, the agenda. Does anyone, I'm sure I didn't get everything, but does anyone have any initial thoughts on things I missed, things that should be changed? Everybody loved it. I nailed it.
This is Brandon Bowser with MEA. Yeah, I mean, this sounds like a great, path forward compared to where we were, which I know everyone on the call is familiar with. So no, I like the direction. I think this is going to be productive.
Okay, great. And thanks for letting me know where you're from. Brandon, if everybody could, when they speak, at least the first time, if you could let me know where you're from, I'd appreciate it. And just one quick thing you reminded me of, I'm not, if MEA comes out with a position today and you want to change it down in November or February or something like that, you're not going to be locked into whatever you say today. If you want to change your position, that's absolutely fine. I know that appeared to be an issue with the initial report. A couple hands up, Mr. Bartlett.
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Judge. Al Bartlett with Chesapeake Physicians for Social Responsibility. Yeah, I just wanted to flag one of the items you have that's actually very important is the benefit cost analysis piece. And there has recently been convened a working group that is supposed to be developing a unified cost benefit analysis for distributed energy resources. So I think we're going to want to take into account whatever that group is thinking about as well. That one's new.
Sure. Yeah. And I noted that was one of the things in the commission's order that we should coordinate with some of the other work groups that are going on. So I will certainly put them on my list to touch base with. Samantha Weaver.
Hi, good morning, Judge McLean. This is Samantha Weaver with the Coalition for Community Solar Access. I wanted to just underscore a couple things you mentioned earlier, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but one of the things that I think was missing from the previous process was an opportunity to talk about what the work group's goals are and what the agenda looks like. So like a very concrete process level, even, I think it'd be helpful, at least for me and, hopefully others in this group, if we could talk a little bit about what do we want to accomplish, say, in the time between now and when the January report is due, what are the pieces of information we want to see included in there, just so we can kind of plan ahead and, show up at these meetings with the best feedback from our members. CCSA, for example, is a member organization. So just wanted to put that out there. I'm sure we'll get to it. But thanks.
Sure. Now, did you, I've sent around an agenda, a draft agenda. Did you happen to receive that, ma'am?
And yes, I did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Did you have any initial thoughts on it, or does it look okay, or?
I think it looks great.
Okay.
I think for a first meeting, you're hitting
Okay.
all the right notes. For what it's worth, my opinion is that we as a group did spend a good amount of time getting an understanding of what the utilities' current practices are. So, and I know it looks like the plan is to not spend a ton of time on that today. So I think, it's like 15 minutes. It seems like a good reminder. But that's something that I think bogged us down a little bit last time. So thinking less about like what do utilities do today, since we kind of covered that, and then, focusing more on, okay, well, what are the other things we'd like to see?
Right. Okay. I think we're on the same page. Thank you. Jacob.
Yeah, hey, Judge McLean. Jacob Berlin from Pepco Holdings. Chiming in around the agenda, I think similar to the other things, I think it's a lot of good topics. To your point earlier, in terms of like the time constraint of the working group and the reports, I think it'd be beneficial for us to have a discussion today or at some point around what is the prioritization of those agenda topics and what areas do we see as the most impactful as part of this distribution planning process. So that way we can really focus on those topics. And kind of as Samantha was touching on, making sure we're hitting those right things throughout this time that we have.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Samantha, do you have your hand up again, or just not put it down?
Nope. Sorry about that.
It's all right. It's all right. So with
Early in the morning.
it's all right. No problem. So in terms of the agenda as I have it laid out, I mean, do we want to reorganize it? I guess I should ask the group, other than the commission's stated goal of setting a consensus for the DSP practices, what else do people want to gain from this?
This is Brandon with MEA again. I think a big thing we want to see out of this, and this is something that my colleague David Comas, he's on leave right now, so he's not joining us today, but that he pushed for, and that we still think is really important, is sort of developing a framework to do a locational value of DERs, if you will, specifically solar, because it's probably going to be one of the biggest ones that we need that kind of analysis for, but to sort of understand, where siting solar or other DERs makes the most sense, not just from a cost perspective, but from like a grid reliability and sort of balancing all those things. We pushed hard for that, and it was met with a lot of pushback. We'll just say that.
Okay. All right. Okay. To the extent that's not on the agenda, I can certainly throw that in there. Samantha.
Yeah, thank you. And I don't know that this needs to be covered today, but I think ultimately what we're hoping to do is kind of work through the steps that are in the JADE process roadmap that we, covered in the previous phase of this group, and understand, what's likely to be included in utilities distribution system plans. What assumptions and methodologies are they planning to use? Are there any areas where, for example, industry can provide input? What are the ultimate goals of the plans? All that kind of stuff, I think is a good starting point. And, I think the roadmap is a good framework for kind of breaking it down and taking it step by issue.
Sure. So maybe we could maybe throw that in with when the utilities under what I have for the agenda is maybe 3B, maybe the J roadmap and how that fits into the utility short and long-term plans. Is that kind of what you're talking about, ma'am?
Yes, I think
Okay.
that's a good spot.
Okay. All right. Excellent. All right. Jacob.
Yeah, to kind of build on what Brandon and Samantha were saying, I think, as everyone's kind of said, the current practices have been really kind of well-trodden discussions already, and really focusing on what is the distribution system planning look like for the future? What are those future needs? What does that prioritization of forecasting look like? And how does that all build together? And what are the tools and the processes? And how does that all kind of come together for looking at that future? And how do we start to plan for that customer of the future? And I think really, is where I think it makes sense for this working group to really drive.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Thaddeus?
Thank you, Judge McLean. This Thad Cully with Sunrun. Just following up on, I think, Brandon's point about locational value of solar, it kind of brought to mind one thing that we don't see a lot of yet in Maryland, but we'd like to see is customer-sided solar plus storage. So I think this would go under the existing, like integrating existing programs, would be maybe expanding that to identifying potential programs that could be very useful in this process.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, thanks again, Judge. Just a couple of quick things. One, I think you have noted in the agenda, at least in one place, and the order establishing the working group, both made reference to PUA 7-802. And I think it's important that we keep coming back to that as we work through these issues, because for one thing, a number of us worked on the legislation that actually became that piece, which defined at least some of the things that we need the distribution system planning process to do. And so I think keeping that, going back to that periodically to seeing, are we really on track to deal with at least those issues? The other thing that we talked about a little bit in the last year's sessions, but we never really decided about it, was the relationship between the different pieces of distribution system planning, the annual plan, the multi-year plan, and the longer term plan. I've done a lot of strategic planning with programs in my time, and the idea that those things should nest within each other. So the MYP should be really the implementation of a more specific implementation of the longer term plan, and the annual plans are really just implementing what the MYP says with any modifications that need to happen. But the idea that the planning process should be coherent and not broken up into separate pieces that don't connect.
Okay. Understood, sir. All right. Is it Jorge? or George? I'm sorry.
Jorge, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Camacho, we are supporting the OPC. One thing that we may want to have in the back of our minds, right? Most of these DER is going to be inverter based. So maybe we could put here somewhere in the draft agenda the standardization of the functionality found on those inverters as a way to enable more flexibility onto the grid. So it will be the topic of standardization of those functionalities, maybe under hosting capacity calculation process. Somewhere
Okay.
we may want to definitely touch into that topic.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That sounds good. All right. Let's see. Somebody else has a comment. All right. Anybody else have any input? And again, this isn't going to be set in stone. I'll add in the things we've hit so far, and I'll circulate it later this afternoon. I know some folks were asking how long we're going to meet today. I was hesitant to give any kind of time estimate because I didn't know how long we were going to be spending on the agenda. Just kind of based on some of the comments and from the initial report. So I'm very pleased with how things are moving so far, and I've got no reason to believe that we won't be able to produce a good product and hopefully reach consensus on a lot of issues. Yes, Thad.
Sorry, my brain just came up with another
You're fine.
here, which would be, I know this is of interest to several parties and probably several of the utilities, would be electrification enablement. That may be the intersection of how at the customer site, things that need to be done to enable vehicle electrification, or if they're switching to a heat pump, et cetera. Maybe that, whether or not we consider that within the scope of distribution planning.
Okay. I mean, we can certainly talk about it. Yeah, Jake.
Yeah, Judge McLean, I just want to, obviously we're talking about a lot of different things and there's a lot of pieces there to consider, and kind of going back to the time constraint, would it be helpful between now and the next meeting for organizations to kind of provide their view on how to prioritize all these topics? So that way, as we kind of dive into the working group further, there's that kind of helpful understanding, right? Trying to keep that scope in scale as we're looking at just the time that we have.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I understand what you're saying. I think this all the things we've got listed. Again, most of this stuff just came right out of the order. Is pretty important. I mean, my thought would be we just kind of go down and hit each topic as we could, and just as Mr. Bartlett said, always keeping in mind the policy goals in 7802. But you did remind me of one thing. So, assuming we can agree roughly on this draft agenda, do we think we can meet every other week, at least initially? Would that be more beneficial, meeting every other week and then mixing it in with some written comments from various from anyone on your particular views? Obviously, for the next meeting, if we were hit the utility short and long-term plans to further improve and promote policy goals, if the utilities could provide an overview in writing to the parties in advance of the meeting, I found that to be beneficial rather than say, Jacob gives a presentation on PHI's plans at the next meeting and only to have people say, well, this is the first time I'm hearing of it. I need to go back and think about it more. I think it's a better use of time to have things in writing, kind of know where people stand, at least initially, so we can have a better discussion. Does that make sense to folks? Okay, at least, all right. I got a head nod and a couple thumbs up. All right, so why don't we at least plan on initially meeting every other week? And I'm sure that's, I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So we'll just plan on meeting every other Thursday for the time being. Again, we've got that technical conference out there, and I don't know what that's going to look like or how that's going to throw a wrench into the work that we'll have done by then. So, all right. Anybody else before we jump into I guess the subgroup report. All right, Jacob, is that going to be your dog and pony show?
I believe Ethan is taking the lead
Okay.
on this report.
And give me just a moment to figure out how to present in
All right.
this particular.
All right. Let me, I may have to give you rights to do that. Just give me 1 second. All right. There, I just added you as a co-host. So that hopefully you'll be able to do that.
Okay.
Do people what platform do people prefer? I mean, I don't have a huge preference one way or the other. I know with this, I've got difficulty live streaming this to YouTube, but I know some folks use Zoom or WebEx. So, all right, okay, all right. We've got the presentation, Ethan.
Great. And good morning, everyone. And thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Chuck. That's just, I'm sure, a lot of people from the previous round. I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces and names. We really, this kickoff has already been very promising. Thank you for this change in tone.
Yeah, I've done a couple work groups before. I don't know if I necessarily run them the best way or the right way, but it'll certainly be different than the first go round. So, Ethan, to the extent you get questions, you want to wait till the end, or you want to take them as you get them?
If you can just stop me, because I've got two screens running to control this presentation, and then
Understood. Okay.
So, let me know when I have a question. All right. So one of the things that happened last year, just around this time, is we in the EU utilities began to be aware that there was conversations going on outside of the work group that sounded very productive. And there,
Hey, Ethan?
Yes?
I've lost your presentation. I don't know.
It looks like it's like a cracked screen, kind of.
That's yeah, that's my background.
You got it.
Okay, so I can't. That's going to be interesting. All right. Okay, I can control it with that keyboard. All right. So yeah, that cracked screen was a cracked screen I took a screenshot of. Anyway, yeah, it freaks out IT people on a regular basis. We began to be aware that there were people having conversations outside of the work group, and the work group being not a great place to have any conversations. We reached out to those people to see if we could develop some themes, consensus, learn what people actually wanted to talk about regarding utility distribution system planning. And so we started having little breakout sessions, and we built them up into a larger group. But eventually it became clear that we weren't really going to be able to introduce anything we were discussing in the DSP process last year. But we did have some really fruitful conversations, and it was among a very large group of people. We have public advocates, we have OPC was at the table, we had DER developers, and everyone shared very openly. And I think this can give us an idea about where we can find areas of consensus and perhaps some new ideas. And I don't think this is my interpretation. I have circulated this to the group a couple of times, but members of the old subgroup, please feel free to jump in and correct me or speak up for yourselves. But I think these themes could be helpful. One of the big things, the first big thing we heard was, DSP process needs to incorporate more transparency around utility long-term strategies, and emphasis on long-term. Really what we're doing on a day-to-day basis wasn't so interesting as our very long-term and further out than we currently do our planning. People wanted more accessibility to information. They wanted to know our plans to be accessible in a way on our websites, clearly defined what we intend to do to support the state's clean energy goals. We wanted the process to improve stakeholder understanding of our decision-making, assumptions, and cost-benefit analysis. I put a little asterisk on there because there is a utility or unified BCA working group going on that is going to really impact how we do that. But so just wanted to call that out. They wanted us to incorporate points for stakeholder comment and participation in those long-term plans, that we should be allowing people to come in and give us some feedback. The people want to know what our future projects are to meet state clean energy and resiliency goals, not just some MYP, very internal, inside the industry kind of discussion, but be very open in how we're trying to change how we do our work. People want to know the assessment and deployment of non-wire solutions, what we're doing there. Things that people were not so interested in were just our projects completed. That's, MYP world, that's just day-to-day work. And the processes or details that feed into that. And the double asterisk there is an acknowledgement of my counterparts over at OPC. They have a regulatory oversight. That is their job, and their interest in the details is different than most stakeholders, and that is, something I want to acknowledge. It's appropriate that they take that level of interest in our work. They felt the DSP should support long-term planning of state energy and clean energy and resiliency policy goals, which I think, everyone circled around. That was a theme that everyone wanted to talk about. It's what the CSNA directed. It was not something we were allowed to discuss in the last round of meetings. And very specifically, people wanted, more than the five-year plan and our 10-year load forecast to meet these goals. If we're looking at climate change, if we're looking at electrification out through 2050, the utility needs to be thinking that way. And another huge theme was support for DER integration and bidirectional grid development. What are the utilities doing to there? How do our DSPs, how can they be improved to support those things? A couple of items came up that were, very overlap with the interconnection working group, addressing causation for the first mover DER developer, the point where somebody puts a certain number of megawatts of solar over the capacity of the feeders that results in additional cost to that one person. That's a big discussion in the interconnection working group. And also the locational value of DERs, and that's happening in another working group as well, mostly in the interconnection. But I'm not saying these are inappropriate to happen here, but I think we can be informed by other discussions. Finally, there was a lot of talk, and this is, I think, where we had some really fruitful discussions as far as changing how we look at how the work here. And I really want to emphasize how important it is to get outside of traditional utility head thinking. That's one of the things I found really useful about these discussions. People brought lots of new thoughts to perspectives on utility work that I didn't have. First, the emphasis on the role of collaboration and innovative approaches, which really was useful. For one thing, we need to be utilities and DER developers really, but everyone needs to be coordinating with state and local governments to meet their needs. Find out what a locality is like and go in and then address their needs as though they were part of the system itself. Like, no longer consider that just a customer thing, but rather the resiliency of state governments, the needs of rural feeders, local needs need to be addressed. We talked a lot about collaborative projects between DER developers and utilities that makes planning more coherent and responsive. The sharing of information, first off, right now, people refer to the utility as a black box. There are also our developer black boxes and regulatory black boxes. And breaking down those walls between different groups, allowing more flow of information to develop projects that serve more needs. A great example is, storage can mitigate interconnection costs when it can also address a system need. This is a great area for collaboration. Let's say you have a rural community, they want to do solar, DER developer comes in, the interconnection costs are high because it is a rural feeder that has, I like to use this example, the lollipop feeder, meaning long exposed feeder with a large load pocket at the end. It's going to be difficult to provide the best reliability for them compared to more redundant feeders. co-locating solar and utility storage at the end can both meet that community's need for clean energy, create resiliency for the feeder, for the community, and act as a reliability, adds reliability for the utility. And, like, that's what my last bullet says. And then finally, one of the big discussions we had, and I didn't see Carl on today, but if Carl Rabago's on, he spoke a lot about the idea of regulatory sandboxes for pilot projects. And just in general, though, a flexible regulatory environment to promote innovation. If we're going to if we're going to align utility distribution system planning with state goals, we're going to have to change some things, and that's going to require some experimentation. And I'm going to stop presenting. If anyone has any questions, please feel free. But I really appreciated the inputs we got from all of the stakeholders during those meetings.
Great. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And before I forget, is that something you could share to the group, just email out to everyone when you get a chance, no rush?
Absolutely, sir.
All right. Anybody have any questions for Ethan based on that or impressions? Yeah, Paul.
Yes, good morning, Judge. I second basically everything that Ethan has been talking about, but I come at it from the larger picture. We were supposed to be looking at the JADE process, what works, what doesn't, what needs to be changed. My background is I'm a professional planner. I was a director of planning for the Federal Transit Administration and civil engineer. And we have a saying in the planning profession, any road will get you there, but it ain't going to be pretty. And we had a process at the federal level for all 50 states that basically set up the expenditure and how money should be spent for hundreds of billions of dollars over decades. And I view the electric systems, the distribution systems in Maryland as nothing else but another infrastructure area that needs to be managed. And one of the things that I saw lacking right up front with the JADE process was that there was a lack of vision, definition. And I saw that the Exelon utilities made the same comment when the working group was first set up. So I want to look at it from a wider perspective because I think the Public Service Commission has a role to play in this. They represent the people of Maryland. So I'd like to offer up the following. The vision should be the same for all utilities. And in fact, that was a comment that was made by the commissioners when they set this up again. Since this is clearly a policy decision, so all the 5 utilities should be marching in the same direction. The second thing is that goals are the second part that needs to be set to fulfill the vision, and it is set in regulations like maintaining X reliability and X safety.
Is that indicating some kind?
Sorry?
Go ahead, sir.
Okay. The last item missing from the DSP report is what metrics will measure movement toward accomplishing the goals. Short term, they could be an MYP, but having seen BGE's MYP, in my opinion, it's deficient. For now, one-year programs need to be put in place based on metrics that are adopted. Lastly, 5 to 10-year plans are not long-term plans. Ethan said that. I totally agree. We know that feeder and transformer requirements take a long time and are critical to the establishment of a two-way distribution grid. The CSNA looks at 2045 for zero carbon, and this should at a minimum, in terms of planning for the utilities, look out 20 years. And the one-year plans would be implementation programs, as was spoken about further. I do not represent any organization whatsoever. I'm a volunteer. I got involved with the PSC way back in 2010 on net energy metering. And I've been involved with working groups since then. One of the things that was an issue for us at the federal level was how to get stakeholders involved with plans and programs. And we ultimately had to set up points where people could weigh in on their views to make any difference in plans and programs. And I would strongly encourage that that happen here. And I see that FERC is also concerned about this because they've recently set up an Office of Public Participation on their interstate transmission lines. So that in kind of a nutshell is where I'm coming from. I'd like to see the PSC take a broader role in terms of direction to the utilities. Otherwise, you have different policy goals or different policies that are set up. And the utilities, I think, are frankly at sea in terms of, well, what do I put my emphasis on in a program or plan? I think there needs to be clear direction from the PSC on what the utilities should be doing. We had that at the federal level. We called them planning emphasis areas. And those departments of transportation and transit agencies needed to address those as part of their planning. I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
All right, you've got one right now. Garrett.
Well, mine's not a question so much, but Garrett Fitzgerald with Montgomery County. I just want to say I do generally agree with Paul that that kind of direction and clarity from the commission is one of those things we should be striving for here for all utilities. But really, just going back to Ethan's presentation, I just wanted to express my appreciation for Ethan reflecting back. I think that you have indeed heard a lot of the different kinds of things that folks would like to talk about. And I think those two slides, I don't know if they were comprehensive, but I think that they reflected back very well a lot of the things that I hope to see discussed here. I was not actively participating in phase one of this group. I heard some stories about it, and that's part of why I didn't plug in. And it feels to me like all that was fake news. This seems like this is going to be a really fun experience with all of you working in this phase. And I appreciate that we're ready to jump into some issues that I think really very much deserve some attention, and that all parties are ready for those conversations.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And I love the enthusiasm. So, and it seems genuine. So, Mr. Verchinsky, am I pronouncing that correct?
Correct.
Okay. The goals and the metrics you referenced, is it fair to say that those would be the result of the regulation, or would you anticipate that those would come out of the regulations that we ultimately propose to the commission?
I think that's correct.
Okay.
I think the regulation should be defined as goals.
Mm-hmm.
And with associated metrics. If you don't have any metrics, nothing's going to get done. You don't have any reporting on an annual or biannual basis. You need to be constantly circling back and seeing if what you asked for is actually being done, or are there constraints for whatever reasons.
Okay. All right. No, and I appreciate, no, and I agree with you, sir. Now, and just in terms, would you prefer to to talk about those goals and metrics at some point in this agenda, or in some point in our agenda before we get into the regulation discussion sometime next summer? And if so, where do you think that should fit, sir?
I think if there's a vision defined, then the goals will naturally flow out of it. I mean, some of them we already have, like safety and reliability.
Okay.
I mean, those are always going to be there. Question is, what are the additional areas that we want the utilities to actively work on? And the CSNA is definitely one of those areas, but you know, there are other areas like efficiency. I mean, I'm not familiar with all of them because I don't work for the PSC, and I have tried to get a broader view, but even so, there's a lot of things going on.
Sure. Understood. All right. Does anybody else have any questions or comments based on what Paul just offered? Everybody's in agreement. All right. All right. I love it. All right. So I'll throw in, talking about a vision, maybe under the short and long-term plans. Maybe if each utility could share a vision, maybe we could try and put one together that might apply to everyone. All right. Anybody else before we move on? This is going a lot smoother than I thought. All right. Let's see. Last thing I wanted to talk about today was if the utilities could give a kind of a brief overview of what their practices are now in terms of how they're promoting the 7802 policies. It's kind of a general throw it out there for the utilities. Somebody wants to go first, or?
Yeah, Judge McLean, we can go first at PHI. We were going to present primarily first, at least on just a quick recap of the current capacity planning processes.
Okay.
At least that's as we understood the agenda. So I have Andrew Dean on, who's the manager of capacity planning at PEPCO, who will do a quick recap of what those current practices are. As I mentioned before, it's well-trodden discussion, had been covered a lot through phase one. So this is really just kind of recapping that for everyone.
No, I appreciate that. And I realize I appreciate everyone's patience, and this may be more for me than it is for everyone else. Ethan, go ahead, sir.
Ethan, you got your hands up. I can go after the question.
I just wanted to bring up one thing that we have a little bit of a difficulty with right now is we have an open rate case where we have presented some of our proposals on various things like this. So, and just in general, wanted everyone to be mindful of the limitations of the utilities when it comes to discussing things that we have in an open proceeding. So we appreciate your patience with our administrative challenges.
Understood.
All right, so hopefully, I can't share my screen. I think I might have to get, I guess, co-host or something similar.
Give me 1 second.
All right, let's give it another shot. I'm still getting an error here.
All right, let me remove Ethan. Maybe that's the problem. No, I don't want. Oh, he's not added anymore. All right, let me. Cancel. All right, who's goes? And all right, I just tried it again.
All right, let me let's try this again. I'm still getting an error. Jacob, I might if I email you this presentation, do you mind sharing it? See if it works for you.
We can try.
All right. Who are you shooting it to, Andrew?
Oh, I was gonna shoot it over to Jacob, see if
Jacob?
he has any
Okay.
better luck
All right.
than myself.
All right. I just added him as the co-host. I apologize about this. All right. We'll remove him.
No, my apologies for not being able to share it.
Well,
If it doesn't work, I can always drop off and rejoin. Otherwise, maybe we have another
okay,
someone else go first.
okay.
Pulling up the file now, so
All right.
I will present shortly. Is everyone able to see it? It looks like it's loading on my end.
Yeah, it looks like it's something. Yeah, I'm just seeing a J right now, but there we go.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see it now. I appreciate that, Jacob. Sorry for the hassle, everybody. All right, so let me get myself situated here. All right, so good morning, everyone. My name is Andrew Dean. I'm the manager of Maryland Capacity Planning for PEPCO, and we'll be going over the current as-is state of our forecasting process, and then we'll go ahead and move forward from that. Just as I think Chuck, you alluded to earlier, that this is not new information. This has already been presented, but just for your informational purposes. So we can move to the next slide. So the forecasting process here at PHI, that includes like Delmarva and PEPCO, starts with our load forecasting. This includes like our 10-year forecast, looking at historical assessments for the previous summer or winter, and then moving over to the system assessment, determining what projects we need to put into a pipeline to construct and ensure grid stability. And then from there, we'll look at different solutions in our toolbox, such as non-WAS alternative, traditional solutions such as a 690 new feeder or new transformer, and then looking to hand that over to our design and project management engineering teams to implement the solution that we end up settling on. We can move to the next slide. So this is our annual cycle that the planning teams take. So starting in September, we look at the historical load from the summer that had just passed. And then from there, we'll go ahead and feed that into our distribution forecasting tool to develop our long-term planning forecast. And then that will feed into our short-term cycle planning, that those are looking at shorter timeline projects, such as like extending a new feeder, balancing load for between feeders, or transferring load, just to again ensure grid stability. And then it feeds into the assessment period happening between June and August. Now that we're doing anything during that time, is that we're doing other things to prepare for that somewhat historical assessment. And then we can move to the next slide. So these are just some of the data inputs that we have for our 10-year forecast. I'm not going to read these line by line, or bullet point by bullet point, I should say. But we're going to, some of the key points here is we obviously want to include the peak historical loads from the previous summer or winter, and include any previous 10-year forecast transfers or new feeders that we're looking at putting in, so we're able to make sure that we're able to handle new load is coming onto the system. We have AMI data, SCADA data that gets fed into it, new business data, and making sure that the new business data that we do have, whether it's fleet vehicle electrification, for example, that we work with our customers like MDOT and WMATA to make sure that we have their timeline in place to understand when that load's coming online. And obviously we have the 876 loads and DER loads to know when we're hitting those peaks, as well as stochastic weather data as well. We can move to the next slide. So this is just the output of our 10-year forecast we have here. This is screenshots from the DSP That's the tool that we use to prepare our 10-year forecast. And this will show us gross and net peaks on transformers, feeders, and substations, as well as mainly just for the feeders. And then we're able to compare that to the equipment ratings of those substations, of those feeders. And then any overloads that we identified will then feed into our assessment period and 2-year plans to remedy those undesirable conditions. Then here we're at the planning assessment, or system assessment, I should say, and we have power flow software such as SIME that will feed we have inputs like our 10-year forecast, like I just had mentioned, historical AMI data, any reliability and performance requirements laid out by our jurisdictional partners, as well as the system configuration like overhead, underground, network systems. Put that into the power flow software to perform those simulations to identify those undesirable system constraint conditions so that we're able to remedy them, as well as put projects into the pipeline so that we can start allocating funds if necessary. We can move over to the next one. Yep. So the solutions that we would look to implement based on the assessment period. So the assessment period and the solution period, they go hand in hand, right? As you're coming up and identifying issues on the system, you're always thinking about the solutions that could be used to remedy them. So in our toolbox, we obviously have system reconfigurations such as load transfers, non-raw alternative solutions. I think one most people know about is the battery energy storage, and then obviously the traditional solutions such as installing a new transformer or new feeders. Obviously, we'll go through the evaluation period and the selection period, which will evaluate which solution makes the most sense for what we need to ensure grid stability, as well as our customers to ensure reliability and resiliency. And then from there, we'll go into the implementation. So after we settle and meet with our stakeholders to determine what the best solution is and get a buy-in and approval, then we'll go to the implementation phase, where we'll hand it off to our project management and design engineering teams. Oh, we can go to the next slide. Sorry, Jacob. After we get approval of the project, we'll go over to we'll hand that over to our project management, design, engineering teams to execute on the approved plan that we had in place and look to execute it from design all the way through to construction and energization. Some of the solutions that we have here in the timelines is, small load transfers and feeder extensions can take about a year. New feeders can take 18 to 24 months. Could take a little bit longer if it's a new underground feeder or if it's in a dense, urban area such as like Bethesda or downtown Silver Spring. And then new substations, 3.5 to 7 years, could take a lot longer depending on jurisdictional permitting and other challenges such as siting in that area. And then lastly is the non-RAWS alternative projects such as battery energy storage that could take up to 3 years or more depending on the scope. And it has the same challenges as substations such as siting and getting community feedback about the siting location. So that concludes the presentation. I know that we went through that pretty quickly, but hopefully, Chuck, that gives you an overview of the planning process here at PHI. If you or anybody else have any questions, feel free to ask it now.
Thank you, sir. I don't know if anybody else is interested, but if you could send that to me just for my own edification, that presentation, I'd appreciate it. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
Thank you for the presentation, Andrew. So really quick, just very overall, I think we, as a group, we may want to spend a little time. So I got two things to mention in regards to AMI. You know, for us to understand to the extent that you're using AMI data to inform your forecasting process, there may be a perception that the AMI is being underutilized. And one of the things that we need to be able to characterize is the temporal nature, right, of peak demand on the areas that you're serving. So just to have in the back of our head. And then, do you mind, Andrew, really quick, going to slide 6? Oh, I don't think you're controlling this.
Yeah, again, I appreciate it, Jacob.
Thank you. So then one of the things that we're interested is to shed light into that big circle in the middle, the power flow software, the power flow modeling, because that modeling establishes certain violations, certain system protection, red flags that people need to understand. So I just want to share that to the group, that that's one of the interests through this effort. But I appreciate, this is very good, Andrew. Appreciate the presentation.
Anytime, yeah. Thanks for pointing that out.
All right, Mr. Bartlett, and then Thad.
Yeah, thanks, and thank you, Andrew and Jacob. It was a good recap of what we looked at in a lot of detail last year. Just a couple of things. In your slides, you mentioned in a couple of places, actually, I think it was the slide before this, where DERs appear in your planning process. But as we recall, I believe PEPCO actually was the only one that actually included in their planning process an active DER forecasting method. But in general, considering the existing DERs on the system is different from this forward-looking approach that we're all talking about now, which is looking at where DERs will be, need to be, can add value to the system, all of that. So it's a different perspective, I believe. In the PEPCO, so I do remember I reviewed the Annex D of the final report, and on page 110 there, you've got a slide that actually does show how PEPCO looks at DER forecasting, but it capped out, it levels out after about 2025, and it really caps out at where the existing capacity on the system is. So basically you've got capacity constraining DER expansion in that thinking, and that's probably the opposite of where we actually need to be. The other point I wanted to make on the solutions development graph, it mentions cost, but it doesn't really talk about the benefit cost analysis. And what we learned in the session last time was that the utilities benefit cost analysis is actually one of the final filters and screens that and actually has an important effect on decision making about what actually gets done. And since we actually we did hear from the utilities that right now neither value nor cost of DERs is included in the benefit cost analysis. So that's where this unified cost benefit analysis thing that the other working group is working on will turn out to be important, because we have to find a way to include the cost and value of DERs in the planning process. And right now that doesn't fit in, but so cost as defined and benefit as defined by the utilities presently really doesn't include some of the things that we need to be talking about.
All right. Thank you, sir. Thad.
Thanks, Judge. So I think it was probably a year and a half ago, FERC may have had a workshop on reliability and climate change, and there was some questions raised about the sufficiency of relying on historical data. I know just yesterday, Duke Energy in North Carolina issued a climate risk and resilience report, and I think they're using a multidisciplinary approach and incorporating the best climate science and putting their forecast together. And I know Con Edison also, several years back did a climate vulnerability assessment report. that, and they're doing an iterative approach to their forecast based on the best available climate information. So I was just going to ask Andrew, and really appreciate the presentation, if there's anything in the current process, if you're capturing warming trends that are happening, if you're looking back far enough and then putting those warming trends forward, or if some additional information might be helpful, particularly as we're looking at equipment with thermal limits and we see the world getting hotter.
Yeah, as far as whether we typically use the trends. I know that I have some folks on that probably are a lot more knowledgeable than me with our forecasting practices, but yeah, I know that we do use historical trends typically to determine what the future is going to look like.
Does that work for you, Thad?
Oh, that at least, yeah, tells me where they are. That's great.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Great. All right. Thank you. Eli.
Yeah, thanks very much. Eli Asher with Stratogen Consulting. We're here on behalf of the folks at the OPC. Thanks for the opportunity to comment here. Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback and maybe put a little bit of a finer point on a comment made by Al. And thank you for this presentation, by the way, and thanks for the comments thus far. What I wanted to note was developing a more clear process around DER forecasting, and this included all DERs, including really electric vehicles as well. The idea being that, as is done today, the utilities in Maryland typically plan their distribution systems according to historical load forecasts and not, or excuse me, historical load, and not so much based on any forecast of DERs, basically any forecast on the export side of things. All, at any time when a DER seeks to interconnect, the utility determine if a hosting capacity upgrade is needed in order to accommodate that DER system. And that's basically bifurcated entirely from the standard distribution planning process, which utilities go about, on an annual or recurring basis. The idea that we had kind of tried to bring up in the first phase of this work group and would like to see this, this phase pursue as well, is kind of placing DER and EV forecasting into the same process as overarching distribution system planning. So in other words, I think in an ideal world, and other states have started to do this, the commission could require Maryland utilities to establish the processes, or this work group could work to collectively determine what a reasonable approach to DER and EV forecasting looks like, what reasonable assumptions, inputs, approaches to modeling that are used, what are the best practices across other jurisdictions that have already done this, and how Maryland can better bring DER and EV forecasting into the overall distribution planning process, such that there are not, two overarching, completely bifurcated processes in terms of how the distribution system is upgraded over time. So just kind of wanted to put a finer point on that piece of not just improving the utility DER and EV forecasting processes, but fully incorporating them into the way that overarching planning is done today. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, sir. Anybody else for PHI?
Judge, if there's no further questions, I'll kind of just wrap it up.
Oh, wait, no, you got a question.
Go ahead.
Spoke too soon. DeAndre. All right, DeAndre, once. All right, can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep, got you now.
Hello, can you hear me? Sorry, yeah, I'm
Yes,
having
sir.
some problems. Comment unmuted. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for the presentation. It was very detailed and kind of piggybacks off what we did in phase one. My question is, you say there was a stage in which you all consider non-wire solutions, and so my question is, how is that process? how does that process happen? How do you all carry out that process? I ask because one of the things that the commission stressed that we work on here in this or try to accomplish in this work group is a process in which stakeholders or third parties will be able to participate in the integration of the distribution system planning process. So my question is, when you're evaluating NWSs, how does that process happen, and is there stakeholder involvement?
Yeah, thanks for the question, DeAndre. And I'll start, and obviously, Andrew, if you have additional comments, as Andrew mentioned, non-wire solutions are very much one part of that toolbox that we look at when the capacity planning teams look to evaluate solutions, right? And obviously, as we're doing that, we want to ensure that we're, identifying solutions that are cost beneficial for the customers, right? And so as that is obviously part of that process there that was outlined. But I also think it's important for us to, as you kind of identify what the PSC is really ultimately getting at, is developing that kind of long-term view of distribution planning that has that stakeholder information coming into it. And so I think as we delve further into this conversation today, it's important, as you kind of laid out, that part of that discussion is around what does that future look like for stakeholder informed planning, and as identifying those third-party non-wire solution opportunities in that.
You got a question in, or DeAndre, does that help or answer your question, sir?
Yes, that answers my question.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Sure. For Jacob or Andrew or for whoever, Samantha asked if PHI has deployed any NWSs to date.
I believe I will. One that I can speak to, and then I'll also turn to Andrew and some of the others that are on the team that may speak to some of those details, is a virtual power plant within the Delmarva power area that we are piloting with PJM and driving really kind of resiliency for customers. And I believe that project has seen, those benefits, right? Those customers have seen those benefits from it, as there was, outages that those battery backups were able to serve for those customers. But I'll also defer to the capacity planning team, who is more familiar with some of these projects, that may be able to identify some of the other ones.
Is anyone from your capacity planning team on the call, or are you just?
I know Andrew is. I thought
Okay.
others were on as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm
All right, there.
yeah, I'm trying to think. I think that the virtual power plant, I think that's the Elk Neck project. That's the one that comes to my mind right now. I know that we have a couple other projects that are in flight, but nothing has been completed, so to speak, that I can think of at the moment.
Yeah, I'll confirm that, Andrew. We do have that virtual power plant in Elk Neck that Jacob referred to. And then on the horizon, we do have one that's planned for investment and in the Ocean City, Maryland area.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Andrew. Mr. Nelson, and then Ethan.
Thank you, Ron Nelson with Stratagen on behalf of OPC. I just wanted to follow up on Deontay's question, because I didn't really hear you explain any process for the non-wire solutions. And so I just wanted to note for the work group that we would like to go into that more detail. Because I don't understand how you're surfacing or how you're identifying needs, how you're evaluating non-wire solutions services that can be provided against those needs, how your procurement process works. Those are the types of details that I think would be good to get into. So thanks.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and hopefully, if it hasn't been addressed to your satisfaction now, maybe in the next meeting when the utilities are addressing their short and long-term plans, that'll be addressed then. I'm sorry. Jacob, did you want to respond, sir?
Yeah, I just want to comment. I think, phase one focused a lot on current practices and everything that went into that. I think as we look to this phase two and really what the legislation is ultimately trying to get to, the discussions that I think are going to be most beneficial for us to have, the discussions that are going to really drive results for the working group and meeting those expectations of the PSC. And, the legislation is really conversations around what distribution system planning looks like in the future, as kind of Ethan outlined earlier, from what some of the subgroup interests were, really diving less into the current practices and more into what does that planning needs for the future look like to be able to meet the customer needs of the future, to be able to incorporate the DER forecasting, the transportation electrification, offshore wind that we're all anticipating, and really driving the conversation in that direction and really looking to meet the needs of the legislation that we're being asked, I think is really beneficial for where the work group should be focusing and less on current practices. Because like I said, phase one was very much a lot of conversation around those current practices.
All right. Thank you. Ethan, I'm sorry I cut you off, sir.
Oh, no, not at all. Just want to say first, the PHI team will discuss their how they incorporate non-wire solutions for themselves. But I actually was one of the people who helped design the process, and it is based on a lot of we can go over the considerations, but it came out of the actually the MedSys grid modernization proceeding in DC again in 2018. In general, I'm hearing, though, a lot of interest in our what we're doing on non-wire solutions and battery storage and some of our more innovative proposals. So I would really like to present on those at our next meeting in 2 weeks, at which point I believe the record will be closed in the BG&E MYP, and so we can have a little more of an open discussion, and we can talk about some of our proposals there. We can talk about some of our grant proposals that we have on the table, PHI and BG&E. We've done a lot of innovative work there. I'd like to present on those, and I would also like to discuss just in general what kind of our battery storage projects in general that we have going. There's a whole set of them that we've kind of alluded to here, but we could go into a much more detailed presentation so that everyone can see what we've designed, what our use cases are, and also then what we're proposing for the future, what we're looking at as ways to approach different problems on the system, different use cases for distributed energy resources. Does that sound like something that the group would like? And sorry it took me so long to get all that out.
Ethan, if possible, Jorge here, if possible, it would be great to see what's your update in regards to the smart inverter pilot.
That I know nothing about, but I will making a note here.
Okay. All right. So I think
Jorge,
maybe
you got me.
some of your folks may know about that smart inverter pilot. Yeah.
I will add that to the list of things.
Okay.
And can some thumbs or applause or anything, people who want to hear about the projects we have in flight and already installed that are working on, that are involving battery storage and other DER solutions?
Okay, yeah, Ronald gave you a thumbs up, and I think what you've got in the kind of in the planning right now, and then what you're thinking long term. I think that all kind of weaves directly into what we want to talk about. But again,
fantastic.
All right.
And per Chuck's direction, we will get that out earlier so that you can actually all have the presentation and know what we're going to say in advance.
Okay.
So we can do the presentation quickly.
Now, Ethan, before I let you go, I know there's a host of things that folks want you to address, as well as the commission. I'm just trying to ballpark. How much time do you think you would need, assuming you don't get questions, and I'm sure you will, to present all that? I'm holding you to anything. So
I think we could keep it to the two utilities. We could keep it to 30 minutes for a total.
Oh, okay.
we're just, one slide listing the various battery projects, a couple of slides on our proposals that are currently MYP, and a couple of slides on future proposals that are out there and we're hoping to get grants for, honestly, and kind of excited to talk about those. We did some really innovative work there.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Camacho.
Yeah, so in regards to, so it's Tim Cutchin, Ethan, he was the one that provided an overview of the smart inverter pilot. And the context, at least for this group, will be how that functionality that you are assessing through the pilot could impact hosting capacity determinations.
All right. Thank you, sir. Alexis.
Yeah, hey everyone. Senior Manager PHI Capacity Planning here. So I want to elaborate and more directly answer the question in regards to NWA considerations. So just for awareness out there, that's a part of our normal design criteria now in regards to a tool in our tools chest. For example, typical utility solutions are line upgrades, feeders, substations, but NWAs are included in there and a consideration as alternatives pretty much on any project that cost advantageous, we can compare it against that. It makes the most sense. So just want to kind of put that on the radar. That is a consideration as normal process. And we do go out for material procurement bid, just as we would a transformer to those vendors that are approved for that type of material.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions for PHI? All right. Who's up next? BGE, PE, SMECO? Any volunteers?
This is Dave Bedard with PE. I can go next.
Great. Thank you, sir.
So we'll go through this again. Are you able to give me access to share my screen?
I can. Whether it will work, I'm not sure. All right. All right. I just added you, sir. Where'd he go? Did I accidentally kick him out? All right. I may have accidentally kicked him out. All right. We have anybody from BGE or SMECO that wants to go next until I get him back?
Yeah, this is Kevin Collins with BGE.
All right. All right. Let me make you. All right. Just made you a co-host, Kevin. Do you have a presentation or?
Yes.
All right.
Let me make sure. Trying to share it. Not too familiar with Google Meet.
I think we're gonna maybe get out of this one. We'll use something else next time. There should be a button. So there you go. You got it.
All right. All right. You guys got me? All right. So good morning. This is Kevin Collins. I'm with the BGE capacity planning team. So very similar to the PHI presentation. This is more of an as-is for our distribution system planning processes. So there's going to be a lot of overlap. So I'll try not to bore too many folks and maybe point out where there might be a couple of differences. So in terms of our planning process, at a high level, there are assumptions that go into our processes. We produce a forecast. We go through a forecast assessment. Coming out of that assessment, we identify system constraints. We develop solutions to those constraints, and then ultimately put them into our long range budgeting plan, and get them through our project authorization processes. So, some of the impacts to our overall processes, it's our planning criteria, and then also making sure that we're understanding system operability, how we're able to improve that, understanding customer and customer DER adoption, how that's impacting us. As we're here to talk about, electrification, decarbonization is starting to impact our loads, as well as data centers is another big item that we're starting to see some impacts. Obviously, Maryland has energy goals that we're all trying to achieve, but also incorporating the grid modernization and some of these emerging technologies that are out there, how we're integrating DERs into it, and also making sure that we have the proper planning criteria in effect for our critical customers. So in terms of forecasting, so our forecasting is a little bit different from the PHI in that we have portions of our system that are winter peaking. So we actually go through the forecasting process twice a year. We do it both for summer and for winter. So we take the observed net loads and go through a weather normalization process at the end of the season. Then we pull in what are our different component ratings for substations, transformers, as well as all the distribution and subtransmission feeder ratings. And then we take into account any planned system topology changes. So any projects that are going on in the future that would involve load transfers or new substations, any planned load transfers that are going on, as well as layering on any known new customer load additions. And then coming out of this, we produce a 1-year kind of short-term look-ahead forecast that's more operational, a 10-year forecast, which supports more of our LRP or long-range planning processes, and then a 15-year forecast that is mostly used for our transmission planning activities. So then we go through and we do an assessment, looking for potential constraints that are on the system. We look for primarily system overloads. We look for overloads on the feeders, as well as the substation transformers and buses under normal conditions, making sure that there's no normal overloads, and normal being kind of the planned configuration of the system. When everything is operating as planned during peak conditions, ensuring that there's no overloads. We also do various contingency analyses for some substations and subtransmission circuits and transmission circuits, as well as we have a small downtown AC network in the Baltimore area. So we do some contingency analyses on these. So contingency analyses, basically, you lose one component, ensuring that the other components are able to support the load without exceeding their emergency capabilities. So loading's only half the equation, though. Literally, we also do our volt bar analysis and planning. So understanding where we have bar needs as well as voltage support needs on the system. Then similarly going into kind of what are our solutions, and these kind of range from very quick and very quick low-cost solutions from load transfers and switching, maybe doing some feeder balancing if a particular phase is out of balance and that's what's causing the overload. Local load control from our AC demand response cycling switches and programmable thermostats. And then you get into a little bit more complicated with feeder upgrades or substation upgrades. Then we look to new feeders, potentially new substations, the non-wire solutions. And I think, like PHI had mentioned, that's kind of a tool in our toolbox that we look for. Any capacity-driven projects, we are looking at non-wire solutions. For those, we typically look to energy storage projects for those. Other type projects, we have a substation and line caps too that we would be installing for any of our bulk bar needs that were identified. This is just a slide to show that, you know, it's a lot of groups get involved with, you know, developing our solutions. It's not just the capacity planning team, particularly when you have a system the age of a BGE system too. Very rarely are you kind of solving true capacity issues. Typically, if you have a capacity issue and, you know, you're likely going to have an aging infrastructure issue. So how do you kind of tackle those together and get the most effective, cost-effective solution? So, you know, we got to balance everything too. You got to balance safety, reliability, the solution cost, how quickly we're able to actually get that solution in place. You know, making sure it's aligned with the state goals, BGE goals, making sure that we're ensuring that we have appropriate operational flexibility. You know, for the control room, you know, making sure that they have the ability to operate the system quickly and effectively, particularly under emerging conditions. So, you know, you don't want to kind of plan the system to the point where it's putting a lot of pressure on the operational folks that actually have to operate the system. And as always, making sure that we're, you know, achieving this with the greatest customer benefit. So once we get through, we identify the constraints, identify our solution that we want to, then we have to go through a project authorization process where we first go through and get technical approval for the project. And that's kind of the entry point. And then we transition it to our project management personnel that take it through phased approval process as they walk through the engineering, design, and construction phases of the project. So we go through a 5-year budgeting process as well. That 5-year budgeting process informs our multi-year plans that we file. Our service dates for these projects are driven by when we anticipate that constraint is going to be when we anticipate that the constraint is going to be realized. Yeah, so project spend, you know, typically these are budgeted over many years. Very difficult to actually engineer, design, and execute a project within a year. These are multi-year projects that require that budget to be spread out. And then as we get that solution in there into the plan, that kind of feeds back into our forecasting process as a known topology change that would occur in the future. So we need to account for that as we go through and reforecast. So I know, so a little bit on our forecasting. So I don't know if how folks are familiar with this, but we plan to a 90-10 weather standard. So this is looking at 30 years worth of weather history and looking for weather that we would expect to observe basically once every 10 years. So this is both for the summer and the winter. We have N-1 contingency design parameters. So as we're going through and doing our analyses, like I said, we're not just looking at, you know, the way the system's normally configured. We need to consider contingency conditions for loss of transformers, loss of a feeder, some ensuring that we have sufficient capacity to be able to pick up those customers and minimize that impact. In certain areas where we have very high, very dense load centers, we have N-2 contingency criteria. Basically, that's loss for multiple components. And then, you know, everything ties back to equipment rating and the methodology. So you can understand loads, but, you know, that's the numerator. The denominator is the rating of the equipment to drive the percentage of load or overload. So those are ratings developed on equipment and are seasonal as well, because like I said, we have both summer and winter. So I know there's that's kind of as is, and there's a lot of emphasis on kind of where we going So I put this together as kind of a quick way to look at some of the things that are underway from our perspective. So in terms of restricted circuits map, so that is something that we do, and it is published on a quarterly basis. Hosting capacity maps are something that for BGE are currently under development, with an eye towards some of the requirements that we're working towards. Both resiliency and reliability need to be considered, and I know we have some increased focus on resiliency as we're moving forward in the future years. Advanced distribution planning guidelines, making sure that we are trying to keep pace with the changes in the industry and updating those planning guidelines. And those guidelines are what really define constraints, and constraints drive solutions, solutions drive projects, and projects are capital spend. So those are very important. Advanced forecasting and modeling simulation. So the distribution system is changing, as we all know. So the existing forecasting tools and methodologies might not be kind of up to snuff to be able to the tools that had been developed in the past didn't really contemplate EVs or building electrification or DER or load flexibility or various scenarios. So making sure that we're updating our tools to be able to do that. And then similarly, as you update tools to provide this advanced forecasting, you need to be able to take that forecasting and implement it into your power flow system modeling tools, and those need to be updated as well to ensure that we're able to take advantage of those updated forecasts. And then also on kind of forward-looking, as we have these goals to implement a lot more distributed energy resources, how are we going to implement the tools, the terms to be able to monitor and control some of those. So those are things that are a lot more forward-looking, a lot of where we're going, at least where we're planning on going. So I think that was the end of the slides. I know I really rushed through that.
All right. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it. Anyone have any questions for BGE? Go ahead, DeAndre.
Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. So my question is, at the forecast stage, you all currently have inputs for DER adoption, I saw. And for future planning here, where it says advanced forecasting, modeling, and simulation, you have DER adoption as well, and EV and other DER adoptions listed here. Currently, how are you all, or what consists of the DER adoption inputs that you are putting in your load forecast? Is that based on historical, or is that forward-looking? And how do you acquire or establish, as of now, the DER adoption that you're included in your forecast?
So as it stands now, the DER adoption in our forecast is what is observed. So those are our net loads that we observe at the head of the feeder and at the substations. So it is whatever impact that existing installed DER is having at the time of the peak. That is what's included in our forecast.
And moving forward, how are you all going to move forward with DER adoption in your forecast?
So I think a lot of that still remains to be seen. It's not something that we've fully ironed out.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Bartlett.
Yeah, sorry, Hud. Thanks again. And thanks for the presentation. Detailed and very interesting. Just maybe a flag of an issue that we need to deal with. Although maybe it's actually going to be worked on under the interconnection working group. Not clear, but in terms of hosting capacity, it's an important issue that we actually didn't get a chance to talk about in phase one of this working group, but it's actually turns out to be a critical determinant of where actually DERs can happen. Hosting capacity is, this comes to the question about planning and how people conceive of it. It's defined by what you mean by capacity. Right now in Maryland, the utilities in general have a 3 megawatt cap on 12 and 13 kV feeders, which in other states has been looked at and found to be way short of the actual capacity of those lines. So New York, for example, went through a process of looking in detail at when they had a similar limit on feeder capacity, and determined that the Public Utilities Commission there determined that that was not really appropriate, and that actually those 12 and 13 kV lines could accommodate perhaps as much as 10 or 12 megawatts of capacity on those feeders. And so if we use the existing definition of capacity, then hosting capacity maps will be quite limited. Whereas if we actually rethink the technical basis of that capacity, that hosting capacity map would look a lot different. And I just want to flag that as an issue that we may want to talk about, and the interconnection working group may also, I think, may want to talk about if they get to it.
All right. Thank you for noting that, sir. And I'm going to plan on throwing that in on the agenda under the hosting capacity to specifically address that issue. And to the extent I forget, please let me know on that. All right. Anyone else? All right. Thank you very much, Kevin. I appreciate the presentation. All right. Dave, are you back, sir?
I am.
I am very sorry. All right, I got fat fingers here. All right, let me try and do this. All right, add as co-host. All right. Hopefully,
I think that worked. Let's see. Let's see if I can share the right screen.
There we go.
Let's see if, can you see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is the presentation that we had given to the electrification study work group earlier in the year. It might be getting into a little more detail than what we want to here, but I'll go through it fairly quickly. So here's our Potomac Edison's territory in Maryland. We serve Western Maryland. We have 500, 230, and 138 kV transmission lines. Sub-transmission is 34.5 kV, and our distribution is both. We have some 34.5 distribution lines, but most of it's 12.47 kV and a little bit of 4 kV. We have 360 total feeders, 101 substation transformers. We are a winter peaking utility. Our winter peak currently sits at 1621 megawatts. Our summer peak is at 1507 megawatts. 50% of our feeders are equipped with SCADA. Let's see. And we do our demand meters from that, but the remaining of our system relies on manual reading of demand meters. We do that 2 times a year to capture the winter and summer peaks. So here's our penetration of DERs by year. The blue bars are the number of DERs, and the capacity is shown by the line chart. But you can kind of see it peaked with the early adopters and then kind of leveled off between 2018 and 2021 with a slight increase there. Total connected megawatts is 103.5. That's about 7,000 DER total installs. And our peak winter and summer demands are shown there as well. Here is our interconnection data, just a different view of it. Between residential and commercial, it shows megawatts and the number of installs, and then by DER type, whether it's solar, wind, or storage, are shown there as well. EV charging. So as far as microgrid penetration, we don't track individual EV charging at the residential level. We do look at it, the DC fast charging, of course, and the public chargers. Microgrids, we don't have any utility scale microgrids deployed within our territory yet. Current capabilities of tracking, location monitoring, controls of DERs, GIS information. So we do map those for the connectivity. We have an interconnection portal, so that customers apply for those through that portal. And for AMI, we do not have any AMI metering. I shouldn't say any. We have about 10,000 of our 300,000 meters do have. So they're automatically read, but it's a drive-by. So we have like a radio controlled system in meter reading vehicles. So some of these are read by driving by, but we don't have what you would call smart meters. So getting into the forecast process. So our forecast is developed to plan the system for capacity, not for energy. It includes feeders and substation transformers for both summer and winter. It's a 12-year. We include a 12-year projection. Each year reported generator for all feeder and transformer capacities at the substation level to flag constraints. Detailed analysis at the feeder level is performed every 5 years, so we do 20% per year. Current year and the 5th year forecast of most critical season are studied. And then, of course, the projects from those would go into our capital budget planning process. So there's our overview of our historical 10-year seasonal peak demand. So we got summer and winter. You can see traditionally we're a winter peaking company, and the most recent here. So this is a year old, but we are back to a winter peaking company, but we do have a couple times, depending on the given season, that we've dipped to summer peaking. So sources of the most granular data were collected on the system, feeder, substation, transformer, SCADA measurements, and manual load readings. Measured at the substation feeder source, SCADA data sent every few seconds to a few minutes, depending on the item or the device. Manual station load readings are provided to peak demand data points, summer and winter. Current capability to distinguish gross versus net loads on feeders. Potomac Edison uses actual measured net loads on feeders. PE does not have the ability to measure gross load or DER production for most net metering installations. Exceptions include 1 megawatt or greater DER PV installations with production meters, net and gross there. So weather data, we do collect hourly weather data from the airports, and we use 30 years of data stored in our forecasting system. Cumulative cooling degree days and heating degree days are used for weather adjustments, and we do normalize that, our load over for weather. We do an 80-20 weather standard, so 80% probability of conditions occurring below the baseline, 20% above the baseline. Captures expectation of more extreme conditions than average. I won't go into details here, but this is our basic overall process for load forecasting. Methods and assumptions for regressions and sample results. 30 years of weather data and 10 years historical peak load data are brought into the load forecasting system. The weather standard is applied to historical actual peak loads to create a weather normalized baseline. DMS develops a best fit regression line describing the feeder or transformer load correlation from the past 10 years of peak data. Adjustments to account for load transformers, existing plans for feeder adjustments to shift load to other circuits, typically to support new customer loads and to relieve previous forecasted overload feeders or transformers. Load transfer is added to the LFDMS to the designated feeder and subtracted from the former feeder. Transfer occurs in the year anticipated, and then season-specific values for each load transfer, summer and winter. So we take into account customer requests for new business loads greater than 300 megawatts. So commercial and residential housing developments are considered, and we look up to 5 years out for those. And of course, this load is added, and we include this where the confidence level is greater than 60%. So we get that feel from the developers on what the probability of that is. How the effects of DERs and EVs are reflected in the data. Existing DER production reduces net loads as measured on the feeders transformers at stations. Existing EV charging is not tracked separately, but assumed to increase actual net load. Load components not measured or tracked separately except where there's a standalone metering. Methods to assess accuracy of historical forecasts. All forecast years are compared against the feeder transformer ratings each season. A loading report of feeder substation transformer capacities are reviewed for variances of significant changes. Constraints and deficiencies are reviewed against the known short list of feeders and transformers with issues which may have planned projects. Any inconsistencies are reviewed in detail for potential corrective action. So considerations here: assume expected growth in DERs and how they are reflected. So DERs and EVs and electrification are things that we don't reflect specifically in our forecast, but we take into account those based on historical values and the projects that we know about. Effects of energy efficiency and demand response are not included, but would be included in the historical figures, and no other factors currently reflect in the load forecast. So that's for regulatory and legislative issues. Any questions at this point?
Thank you, sir. Anybody have any questions for PE? I guess you nailed it, Dave. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Do we have anyone from SMECO?
Yeah, this is Adam with SMECO. If you give me control.
I will, and I will apologize in advance if I kick you out. All right, Adam, let's see.
That's fine. I want to present before everybody gets hangry.
All right. Yeah, you're all standing between us. All right, there we go.
Let's see how I do this. All right, everybody sees my screen?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'll make this brief. So SMECO, we're a small nonprofit electric cooperative located in Southern Maryland. Our customer count's about 173 customers. Our core ideology is very simple. We provide competitive, priced, reliable power to our customer members that we serve. So we're very different than an IOU. Our customer members help guide the processes that we do. SMECO service territory is a very large peninsula with multiple smaller peninsulas located in Southern Maryland. We have Charles County, St. Mary's County, and Calvert County, and a little portion of Prince George's County that we share with PEPCO. Our customer base is 92% residential. Most of our load is commercial though, but we have a lot of residential customer counts. Our territory predominantly rural with some variable suburban areas mixed in. We have a lot of waterways and a very forested area throughout our service territory. As I mentioned, our service territory is very peninsula, so a lot of capabilities of ties and redundancy makes it very difficult. We currently have 3 solar farms on our system. We have 2 that are on the distribution network, a 5.5 megawatt and a 10.3 megawatt. And then we just interconnected with a 28 megawatt solar farm at our transmission level. SMECO's typical system demand, light load, which is considered less than 40% of peak load, is consists of over just shy of 3,500 hours throughout it annually. Our typical load is usually between 40 to 60%, and then our shoulder load, 60 to 80% of peak demand, is about just a little over 1,000, and then we hit our peak demand less than 2% of total hours a year. So our project planning process typically consists of 15 kV distribution projects, which the engineering process of that, it consists of about a year. So we'll do a design and try to obtain right of way and procure material. And especially in today's day and age, sometimes it takes 2 years due to material demand for any projects that we do. For our larger 15 kV station related projects, engineering and right of way can take up to 3 to 5 years. I do want to stress that the electrical system is very dynamic, and though we have a plan, things change. Builders build faster than we anticipated, and we may need to shift projects around to ensure that we can meet all future demand that we have within our system. We have 4 core documents that we work with part of our planning process. We have a load forecast, which we'll go into a little bit further, electric system plan, financial forecast, and then our construction work plan, which is considered a short-term plan, and an annual budget. So the core documents, the load forecast is based on statistics provided by Maryland State Office of Planning, which kind of helps baseline what our 20-year base forecast of customer member counts, energy sales, and summer winter seasonal peak demands may be. Our electric system plan provides a roadmap for long-term system developments, considering historical system loads. And just like PE, we have the net load. We don't have a gross load. So whatever the peak load is with DEA implementation, it's all calculated into one load. We have 5 core system planning considerations when we look at our system plan. We look at capacity, present and future. We work very closely with developers, builders to understand what their build-out plan is to ensure that we can meet those capacity needs. We also look at aging, obsolete, or poor performance history related to our equipment and feeders, as well as our tap lines. We want to look at, when we do in our planning process, we look operationally. We want to make sure that we have tie lines, redundancy, and we have a resilient system. And then we also evaluate our power quality. We want to reduce the amount of interruptions to our customer members, maintain a steady voltage profile, and reduce any system losses. We do evaluate new technologies as DER, energy, battery storage, smart grid, and EVs. Capacity considerations, we do look at historical loading, we look at future load forecasting and growth spots. We also look at phase imbalancing and see if we can balance loads within our feeders. We look at system losses, and we always evaluate DER and EV impacts. One of the ways that we try to address EV impact in the future is in all our new developments, we ensure that we size houses for future EV additions in the future, though initial applicants might not have an EV. For facility consideration, we look at aging and deterioration of line and equipment, preventative maintenance activities, maintenance history, vegetation management activities, any issues with right-of-way and line access, existing reliability performance, and look at if an overhead to underground conversion is viable within a particular area. We also continuously add protective sectionalizing equipment and try to make sure our feeders coordinate in the most ideal methodology. Operational considerations. We look at seasonal peak summer and winter loads. We do look at seasonal DER related to light spring loads. We want to make sure that we have a redundant and we have operational flexibility within our system, and we always look at our critical loads within our service territory. For power quality, we always look at our line and transformer thermal loading capacity. A lot of the transformer thermal loading capacity is using AMI data that we evaluate transformer overloading. We use head end and end of line voltage profiles. We utilize protective devices to interrupt faults within our system, and we adjust reactive power needs as required. New technology and trend considerations. We are always continuously looking at new emerging technologies in a very delicate manner. We're always looking at DER, battery energy storage, electric vehicles, distribution automation, and real-time operational power flow with DMS and DERMS as well. Are there any questions at this time?
Sorry. Anybody have any questions for Alex or Adam? I'm sorry.
Well, then that's great.
All right. All right. All right. Let's see. That is pretty much what I wanted to accomplish today. Like I said, I'm going to add in some things into the agenda and recirculate it. And if I could get the utilities to circulate to the parties, since we're meeting next Thursday, since we're meeting in 2 Thursdays, why don't we just say by next Thursday, if utilities could provide what's now under 3B, which is the short and long-term plans to further improve and promote policy goals while considering a host of factors. Is that something that's doable for the utilities? All right, Ethan says yes. All right, I'm going to take that silence as a yes. So if you could forward those presentations, whether they're memos, I think it'd be preferable if it was in a memo or some kind of written format, so folks could respond to it. We do that by next Thursday. Hopefully we'll be able to hit the ground running to see what the current plans are. I know it's just listening to those presentations. We certainly have our work cut out for us in terms of reaching a consensus for all the utilities, but we'll jump off that bridge when we get to it. So with that, does anybody have any questions or comments before we end today? Yes, sir.
Hey, just wanted to thank everyone for a very collaborative and really this is a much nicer discussion than we've had previously. And also a round of applause for Chuck Breath of Fresh Air McLean. I mean, seriously, we got more done today than we did in a year.
Well, I'm happy. I'm glad, believe me. I know just looking at the order and looking at how things had progressed or did not progress in the last work group, I don't want to say I wasn't looking forward to this, but I wasn't looking forward to this. But I feel much better about how everything sits now. Again, I know we still have a lot of work to do, and we won't agree on everything, but I feel better about the time that we have. So I don't think we're going to be maybe as crunched, at least initially. So, but I appreciate the kind words, Ethan. Eli.
Thanks, Chuck. Seconded on Ethan's comments. I also just wanted to ask about next steps. You mentioned you're now thinking bi-weekly meetings. So are you envisioning same time next Thursday? And do you also have any expectations on duration of these meetings?
All right. So we'll meet same time in 2 Thursdays. So that'll be It's all right on the 21st. And again, that'll be, it's certainly subject to change depending on how things go and how far we get. In terms of duration, it's hard to say. I would say, if we've got all 5 utilities, or, I'm throwing PHI and I'm separating PHI or Pepco and Delmarva, and just ballpark, if they go at least a half hour, that's 2 hours just on their presentation and their questions. I'd plan at least, and if we take a lunch break, which I'm fine with doing, I would say at least, maybe 2 to 3 o'clock. If we finish earlier, great. I'm happy to go longer as well. But that'd be my expectation, at least for the next meeting, sir.
That's very helpful. Thanks, Chuck.
All right.
Would you be able to just send out an invite with those details?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, I'm going to kind of play around with the agenda a bit and add some things in that folks brought up, more or less to emphasize, what we need to hit. And if I miss something, let me know. Again, the schedule and the agenda will be flexible. I'll send out an invite. Maybe we'll do a different platform since we had some issues today, and some of the issues are on my side. And with that, does anybody else have anything? All right, well, good. We're done at 12 today. And again, I appreciate everybody's cooperation with this, and I'm confident we'll produce a good work product for the commission. All right, with that, enjoy the rest of your Thursday and your weekend. And for Mr. Mike Heel, if he's still here, go Chiefs.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.